I'm going to do something I've never done before. Welcome to another episode of Erik Wait Whiskey Studies, and in this video, which is going to be recorded over a number of days, I'm going to do something I've never done before, which is I'm going to take you through my entire process of reviewing and analyzing a whiskey. So I've done a few videos in which I've done a neck pour video, done a neck pour review, but usually I go through the entire process off camera and then share with you my final results, my final evaluation of the particular whiskey. But I thought I'd walk you through the process to not just show you that my impressions, but see how a whiskey perhaps develops and how my opinions might change as I go through a number of different steps. So we begin with the uncorking and the initial impression. Now, one of the first things I want to do is, as I'm opening this bottle, I want to share with you my notes on this whiskey. The Teeling Small Batch Irish Whiskey is a blend of grain whiskey and malt whiskey, aged separately in ex-bourbon casks, married in Central American rum casks for 12 months. It's bottled at 46% alcohol by volume and sells for only $25 in my neighborhood. So one of the interesting things about Teeling is they put this sort of a label over the top, a little strap over the top. Not exactly sure why they do that. Usually I've seen this with wines and it's done, it could be just purely decorative, but with wines a lot of times it's done in order to prevent fraud. Wines are very, very, very collectible. Whiskeys are obviously increasingly so becoming very, very, very collectible, and so fraud on the secondary market is common. So there's a number of different ways in which you can sort of prevent fraud. There's actually very, very high-end wines are putting little special microchips on the top, which can be read and tracked, special seals and so forth, or sometimes it might just be for decorations. So Teeling puts these on, but they seem oftentimes easy to peel off and pull on, but nope, not this one. It's going to make a mess on camera. It happens. So walking you through the process, you'll see all the dirty stuff as well. All right, let's see if we can find the tab. There we go. A lot of times I like to use a cork I like to use a knife in order to get a clean cut. But this time, I'm not going to. Usually I'm going to use a knife because I want to preserve the cleanness of the cut, but also if I'm doing uncorking on video, I like it to look nice. All right. The initial pop of the cork. Nice sound. It doesn't mean anything, but whatever. Teeling is using corks. I've already had one bottle from Teeling. In fact, it was the previous small batch that had cork taint or trichlorine anisole. Trichlorine anisole, TCA, is really, really pervasive. It can get into not just a cork, not just into a bottle, but it can infest an entire winery or perhaps even a distillery. So you got to be really, really careful with it. There are a number of different causes for cork taint. It can be that the tree from which the bark is derived had some herbicides or insecticides on it. So even before the bark was peeled off a tree, and of course they take a little puncher and they punch to make corks, even before the tree was approached, it had some herbicides on it, and consequently you had an infected cork right from the beginning. But also part of the sterilization process, sometimes the means by which they use to clean the corks can actually cause an infection as well. So when I first open a bottle, I like to smell it. Now, to be honest with you, I'm super sensitive to TCA. If this had TCA, without even putting my nose anywhere near it, I would immediately pick it up. And on the previous bottle, I did just that. It's kind of funny. You pull a cork and you smell it, and the brain goes, "Oh no!" And you're hoping that you're wrong. You're hoping that you're wrong. So then you go the next step. You go, "Oh no!" I smell it again, and then you smell this, and then you go, "Oh no, God!" Now, this is really, really nice. This is really, really nice. It smells fresh. It smells fresh. I'm really getting like an apple juice just off the cork, and of course a nice clean cork. So that's the very first step in which whether it's a wine or a whiskey is I evaluate the bottle just from the neck pour. Nice. All right. Obviously, pour myself some. Now I'm going to do initial nosing, an initial tasting, and sort of give my first impression evaluation. You've heard me say this a gazillion times. If you've heard me say before, I don't judge a whiskey just based on a neck pour. I like to let it breathe. So, color-wise, it's sort of a nice, light, shiny gold color. Sort of a, and then maybe just slight touch of copper as well. Now, I'm not getting a whole lot on it. Don't necessarily expect it can be very quite muted at this stage, and then you give it some time and it'll open up. I do get some minor apple notes, lighter vanillas, a little bit of citrus, everything's quite minor, a little bit of lemon, a little bit of lime, but everything's quite muted. It is very, very quiet at this point. That's why I'm whispering, because it's sort of an analysis, sort of kind of the way this is. It's quite, anyway, you get the point, right? Let's take a quick sip. Nice. One more. Apples, pear, vanilla. Vanilla showing up on the back end. I'm getting a tanginess on the back end, almost like a little bit of orange character. So I'm getting nice citrus notes. What is really, really hanging around is vanilla, some vanilla. There's a minor, I mean, just real minute notes of cinnamon. It seems youthful, but also seems very, very, very fresh. It seems very vibrant. Alrighty, so at this stage, what I will do is take a coin, right, and put it over the top. This is one of my coins. If you want to buy one of these, send me $20 American via PayPal at erikwait@yahoo.com. If you have difficulty with PayPal, just send me an email at erikwait@yahoo.com. And I will send you a link to PayPal, and then you can pay me $20. So if you want one of these, all right. So put one of these over the top. And I usually like this to sit like this for at least 12 hours and then come back to it. So perhaps the next day. So I might first open it, say in the evening after work, smell and taste like this, put a cover over like this, and then 12 to 24 hours later, come back and revisit the whiskey. All right. Next step.
7 hours later.
All right, so it's been 7 hours since I did an uncorking and poured this into this glass. Now, I don't have a strict formula that I follow in how I do this. It can depend on a number of different things. Obviously, I opened this at 11 o'clock in the morning. If I'm opening something during the week, I'm not opening a whiskey at 11 o'clock in the morning. I would have opened it up the prior night. I would have opened it at 6 o'clock at night, tasted it, and then 24 hours later, 6 o'clock the next night, would have gotten back into it as it's had time to open up. Now, whether or not I immediately put a cap on it is going to depend on a number of different things. If it is really expressive from the neck pour, then it's not going to need as much time experimenting, playing around with it to get it sort of aerate, sort of decant it. I may also decide to rather than smell and taste it, make some preliminary notes, I may also decide to sort of kick back with the glass, watch television, perhaps do some editing on my computer, watch a movie, or whatever else I'm doing, and sort of experience it with the glass in my hand as it opens up in front of me. It all depends on my time, my mood, and the nature of the whiskey. Sometimes it's a better experience to actually have it in your hand and spend several hours with this one glass, going a little bit by a little bit over several hours and experience it opening up. Now, I know there's articles going about on Facebook and so forth by some so-called scientists and chemists saying that neck pourers is a myth and so on and so forth. I would like to invite those scientists to come drink some whiskey with me, right? I mean, ask any sommelier about wine and they're definitely going to tell you that they open up. And the same thing happens with whiskeys as well. I'm not saying they're exactly the same, but the same principle happens with both whiskeys and wines. So this has been here for 7 hours. Usually, once I've had a coin over it, it'll maybe 12 hours. Another thing I'll do is perhaps if I did a neck pour, spent a couple hours with it, right? My next pour will actually be the following morning. And the following morning, before I head off to work, say about 6:30 in the morning, I'll pour some in a glass, smell it. I won't taste it because I'm not drinking whiskey before I head off to work, but at least smell it, put a coin on it, and then I'm out the door going to work. By the time I get back to the glass, you know, I've been at work, we'll have had dinner, and so on and so forth. 12 hours have gone by, and it's been sitting there for 12 hours. And so that's my second pour. Now, I can repeat this process several times before I actually sit down and do the video, do the recording of the video and the review, based on my perception of how the whiskey is developing and how far I'm getting into it. I like to get it past the shoulder and about slightly above the halfway mark before I do an actual video. Now, these bottles are rather dark. They can be a little challenging, you know, to tell how far you're along because you can't see through them. But generally, I probably just above the halfway mark before I like to do my actual video. So what's the difference between how this was 7 hours ago and how it is now? It is definitely, I would say, about a 75% increase in terms of the aromas. It was quite muted. It was quite silent and quiet when I originally did an uncorking. Now it's quite a lot more expressive. I'm getting pears, apples, cinnamon, vanilla. Not only is it more expressive in terms of more aromas coming out, but they're now more integrated. They're much more combined. So it's not like I'm just getting one aroma, then another aroma, another aroma. They're sort of all coming at me at the same time. All right, on the palate. That sort of initial bite of alcohol has gone away. I think also on the neck pour, not only were the aromas and flavors not coming together, but just the alcohol, apart from everything else, was sort of giving me a bit of an alcohol bite. Now things have become much more integrated, and all the aromas and flavors are really well integrated with the alcohol component. The biggest thing coming out of this whiskey right now is a lot of vanilla, sort of like a lemon pie character to it. There's actually a little bit of a tropical note, getting some banana. There's a slight raisiny note. Coconut. I don't eat a whole lot of coconut. So most of my experience with coconuts made with maybe an Almond Joy or a Mounds bar, right? It's just going to be more like in terms of coconut surrounded by a chocolate, or if you had something that's had coconut sprinkled on it. But definitely a lot of coconut character coming through as well. Texturally, it's creamy. It has some nice thickness and weight to it. And it's got a real long finish. So the apples and pear notes are more up front. And then kicks in the vanilla, coconut, some banana, almost like a banana cream pie character to it. And I'm still tasting it now. What is really sticking around is the vanilla note and that banana note. Almost like a banana pudding than eating, say, a fresh banana. So 7 hours has made a big difference. Now, I'm now going to take it to the next step. My next step after this is to put it on ice and try it with a little bit of water. Just put a couple drops of water, see if it opens up, and then try it on ice. Now, in the early days of my whiskey experience, I sort of approached whiskey the way I approached wine, which is you rate the wine as it's made, right? As intended by the winemaker. The winemaker doesn't tell you, hey, age this for 10 years, age this for 5 years, rate it and score it in 5 years, 10 years. They don't tell you, hey, decant it for an hour and a half. They don't tell you what to do with the wine. So the condition of the wine, when you review it, is dependent on what you're actually doing with it. But what you do with a wine, whether you're decanting it or not, how long you've aged it, can affect your perception of it. But you always would want to judge a wine based on the known vintage. Similarly with a whiskey, you want to deal with it first as it's made by the producer, but they don't necessarily expect you that you're going to drink it straight all the time. They think you're going to make cocktails, you might put it on ice, however you're going to enjoy it. So I take much more of a comprehensive understanding of a whiskey in my evaluation of it. So it's almost as if I'm breaking it down to a neat score, a little bit of water score, and an ice score, and sort of put all that together in terms of my overall perception of the whiskey. Some whiskeys open up with just a little bit of water. I'm not going to give it much. Just going to give it a slight teaspoon, actually half of a teaspoon. Not going to give it much. Do not swirl it. Do not swirl it. I've seen a lot of whiskey tubers that put water in it and they start swirling around. All you're doing, when you're just putting water and you start swirling it around, you're now mixing in the water and you're defeating the purpose. All you're doing is lowering the ABV. You're not doing anything else to it. What you want to do is put just a little bit of water into it, so that it breaks up the oils in it, and so it then expresses itself a little bit more. Potentially, not all whiskeys improve with just a touch of water. It takes a lot of practice also to sort of determine, okay, does this whiskey seem like I'm going to put 1 teaspoon, a half teaspoon, a couple drops? You sort of calibrate your perception of whiskeys and how much water you're going to want to add. And that takes practice, until you can sort of understand what is the character of this whiskey and how much do I think I want to put in there with water. All right. And it's going to be different when you're talking about bourbons. If it's a non-chill filtered, that's really probably one of the most important. If it's been filtered, I find a lot of times if you're adding a little bit of water to a whiskey that's been filtered, it's not going to do that much. It's the unchill filtered whiskeys that seem to have the greatest impact of putting a little bit of water. Is it more expressive now than it was before? Perhaps a little, but it did make a remarkable, huge change. Maybe slightly more vanilla, maybe slightly more cinnamon. Maybe the sort of banana cream pie is being a little bit lesser, and the cinnamon is starting to pop more. But it might be just because I've had more sips. So the next thing I want to do is try it on ice. All right, so I've emptied my water glass here. This is a Riedel Spey glass. I'm going to put in 1 ice cube. Now, I know a lot of people sort of stick their nose up at putting on ice. They think, oh, you're just going to mute it, you're just diluting it, and as it melts, you're diluting the whiskey and so forth. And they think it's going to close up, and then put in the lower temperature on your tongue. All you're doing is reducing flavor. I disagree. Some aromas and flavors will be reduced, but other aromas and flavors will be enhanced. It's been my experience that those elements which come from the spirit itself will be reduced a little bit when you put it on ice. Those characteristics which come from the cask, those tertiary characteristics which come from aging, may actually be enhanced. Particularly, I find vanilla and spice to be enhanced. So, which is why, and you hear a lot of people say this, they like ice on their bourbon, because bourbons, that new cask, it's going to have a lot more vanilla, a lot more cinnamon, a lot of those oak spice characteristics will often do really nice on ice. Now, I live in California. It's a very warm place here. Particularly here in 2020, we've had, and I live in inland California, we've had temperatures on a regular basis 95 degrees and up. I'm now in October. We're still hitting 90-degree temperatures in October. Whereas over in Glasgow, it's cold and raining, and everybody's putting on the parka and turning on the heaters already. So, because people are going to drink a whiskey in a number of different ways, I'm going to rate a whiskey according to the different ways in which people are going to enjoy it, which is going to include some ice. It also tells me which whiskeys are going to be good to serve during summertime. Some whiskeys are better for summertime than others in hot days, right? Generally speaking, the peated whiskeys for me, heavily peated whiskeys for me, the Ardbeg, some of those are my favorites, don't do as well on ice. It's not that I don't like them, it's just they too much is muted. I tend to like more of the fruit forward and cask forward, the vanillas and the cinnamons and stuff like those type of whiskeys I find to do better on ice. Now, I've been talking here, I can now feel in my left hand that the temperature of the glass has dropped and now it's ready to go. I do give it a minute to let the whiskey cool down a little bit before I try it. And exactly as expected, the cask characteristics are becoming more pronounced. The vanilla is becoming more pronounced. The cinnamon is becoming more pronounced. The rum characteristics, the remnants of the rum is becoming much more pronounced. It's as if I'm drinking, someone poured in some rum in with my whiskey. The texture, because it's unchill filtered, when you put ice on it, something funny goes on with the oils in the whiskey. They all sort of like almost become thicker. And so a whiskey can almost be like as if you're drinking melted ice cream, which is really, really delicious. Now, the ultimate purpose for drinking whiskey is for enjoyment. And if it's more enjoyable when it's colder, regardless of whether or not you get more or less flavors, if it's more enjoyable, then that's how you want to drink it. And if it's a warm day, I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt, right? I took the jacket off. It's more enjoyable now on this warm October day here in California. And this is absolutely wonderful on ice. A little bit of water didn't do much. It's absolutely wonderful on ice. It also seems sweeter. Again, it's that experience of drinking melted ice cream. Alrighty, so I'm going to actually repeat this event, everything I just did. Again, I'm going to put some more in a glass. I'm going to put a coin on it, and this time it's going to sit in there for 24 hours. I will return to this glass in 24 hours. Enjoy this entire glass neat. I'll try it again on ice, maybe try it again with a little bit of water as this continues to open up. Now, tomorrow morning, before I head out the door to go to work, I'm going to take the coin off. I'm going to smell it, right? I'm going to log that into my brain, and then that'll give me something to look forward to when I come home from work. Even if I don't have the glass in front of me, even if I'm not tasting at that particular moment, my mind is on this whiskey all day long. I'm thinking about it. I'm analyzing it. I'm thinking about everything that I experience from it. And it makes me really, really look forward to at the end of a long work day to come back to it. I also tend to have more questions throughout the day. I'm thinking, well, what about this? What about this? I have more questions about the whiskey as I continue to meditate on this whiskey. Alrighty. So, got another step to go in this process, and see you then.
24 hours later.
So we now come to what is really my favorite part of preparing for doing my final whiskey review, which is, I've had it a neck pour, I've done a preliminary sort of tasting of it and get a preliminary sense of the whiskey, and I've had another glass and seeing how much it's opened up, and now is the time in which I kick back, relax, and drink along with some of my fellow whiskey tubers. One of the things I like to do is, I've had my notes. I already have my own perception of what the whiskey is going to be like. But I want to compare against some of my friends, fellow whiskey tubers, and so at this point, I'll search on YouTube, just whatever it is I'm reviewing, and see who has done a video. Now, I subscribe to about 60 whiskey tubers. There's probably a dozen or so that I watch faithfully. One of them is my buddy Jason here at the Mash and Drum. And he's doing a whole lineup here of Teeling whiskeys. But others would be Scott and Bart and Scotch Test Dummies, obviously the Vault, Bill, the Whiskey Dick, and many others. It just, of course, Rafi, can't miss Rafi. But then sometimes I'll discover some whiskey tubers I haven't heard of, haven't run into. But because I'm searching for this particular whiskey on YouTube, I'll discover someone new, and I'll check them out. I might subscribe, might not subscribe, but really is to get a different array of opinions of this particular whiskey and compare notes. And I would say 85 to 90% of what I'm going to get from my fellow whiskey tubers is what I've already gotten. Right? All I'm doing is confirming what I've already got. Now, they might describe something a little differently, and yet they're really getting to the same point. So if I'm saying raisins, they might say dried plums. You know, it's in the same sort of camp. If I say chocolate and they say mocha, we're in the same camp, right? Apples, different times of pears, vanilla, whatever else. And they may get a little bit more, creative in describing things. But we're still in this same camp. And so not only is this a way of sort of comparing notes, and if you go to some whiskey tubers and you go to the comment sections, you might see me making a comment. I'll put the date in there, October 12th, 2020, and then I'll be a comment. I'll put the date in there and I'll say, hey, I'm going to be reviewing that same whiskey, and I'm just comparing notes, right? So if you're ever watching Scotch Test Dummies, Mash and Drum, the Vault, or Bill, the Whiskey Dick, I remember Scotch 4 Dummies, look in the notes, and if you see me in there, a lot of times you'll see that I'm putting a date in there and what whiskey is I'm drinking along with them in order to compare notes. So the idea here isn't to for them to tell me what I'm supposed to be smelling, but rather just to say, yep, I get that, yep, I get that. Nah, I don't know where they're coming from on that one, but yeah, I get that, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I totally agree with on that. Yeah, I think they're totally spot on right there. And sometimes I'll leave even good comments to them, say, hey, I think you're absolutely spot on with it. Nah, I don't know about that, right? This is fun because not only is this part of the whiskey education, exploration of whiskey, but it's like we're drinking along. We're having a good time, hanging out, and drinking. This is the best way to enjoy a whiskey. If you can't actually be hanging out with your friends in person, or maybe doing a live stream, is pour yourself a glass, smell it, take a little sip, right? And compare what you've got here on the screen and see if you agree with them. And it's just rather than just sitting there watching them, like this, but drink along with them. It's for me, this is the best part. And it's a part you never see. The best part of trying whiskeys, for me, is the part you actually never see because I don't put this on camera. Alrighty. So now that I have my preliminary notes on this whiskey, right, and I'm enjoying hanging this out, gonna finish watching this video, but the next step is to do the final review, which I'll do tomorrow. Alrighty, so now we come down to the final step, which is my actual review. Now, a lot of what goes on in my evaluation of a whiskey goes on in my head. You hear me state my aromas, you hear me state the flavors and give my general perception of the structure and all that. But what's going on in my head is a lot more than just how I feel about a whiskey. There's an actual evaluation, a criteria, a sort of a score chart that's going on in my head. And there's certain things that I am looking for and expecting from a whiskey if I'm going to give it, a higher score. So the criteria, the things that I'm looking at, would include what is the quality of the aromas and flavors, and that's sort of obvious. The second would be, and you hear me talk about this a lot, is the development of the structure, the inch from entry to the mid palate into the finish. I tend to give higher scores to whiskeys that have a lot more going on from the entry to the mid into the finish. I like a journey, I like a ride, rather than just, something that's sort of the same all the way through. Third, and this is sort of coming on the end of that, is the length of finish or the follow through, right? So, after you you sip it, taste on the mid palate, go into the finish, and then you swallow. How long does it linger, and does it continue to develop in the finish? Some you can swallow and it continues on a ride. And does it drop off? Does it sort of slowly decline? And that's a huge factor for me, because then you're getting more out of your whiskey, out of that particular sip, than just what you're getting on entry. Fourth is mouthfeel and structure. Mouthfeel and structure. Now, I like to spend a lot more time. I could do an entire video just on mouthfeel and structure. With wines, you're talking about acidity, tannins, alcohol, which would be the body, and then the length of finish. We don't talk about acidity with whiskeys, and obviously alcohol is a big factor in it. And with heavier alcohol wines, such as fortified wines or spirits, mouthfeel is a big important factor. Now, maybe someone likes a thin whiskey. Maybe someone likes a thicker, more mouthfeel whiskey. I tend to like a whiskey that's sort of without, see, this is about balance, without being too sort of gloopy, right? Without it being too syrupy. I don't want it to be syrupy, and I don't want it to be thin, but I do like a nice mouth coating feel. And in all this, we want balance. We want balance. So of all the aromas and flavors that we get from the whiskey, there shouldn't be necessarily any one component that sort of overruns everything else. It doesn't mean everything is equal. It's not like all your levers on your equalizer have to be straight across, but that you don't have one particular feature that sort of overrides everything else, and sort of it's difficult to get to any other aromas and flavors to get past that one note. Now, having said that, peated whiskeys, right? A lot of times it's the peat that kind of is that sort of assaults you, and you have to do a little bit of work to get through that. But I found peated whiskeys, as they open up and as you become more acclimated to peated whiskeys, if you're new in your journey, you haven't spent a lot of time with peated whiskeys, that can be, it's so strong, so pervasive, it can be hard to get out of things. But if you get accustomed to peated whiskeys, you'll find that the fruit characteristics, the spice and all that will really shine, and the peat becomes quite complementary to all the other factors in a whiskey. The final thing, which is more of an emotional response to a whiskey, is, does the whiskey have a wow factor? Now, by that I mean a positive wow factor. It isn't like, wow, this is awesome, but something can also be absolutely horrible and you go, wow, but in a good way. Does the whiskey bring the wow factor? And for me, in order to get past 90 points, get past 95 points, it's really got to have the wow factor. And in my top 10 for a year, to make my top 10, it's not just a matter of points. It's got to have that wow factor. So for the top 10 for the year, it's probably my number one criteria for making that top 10 is that wow factor. So what am I getting on this whiskey? I've already sort of done a preliminary and tasted a bunch of different times. I probably had, since the beginning of this video, 5 or 6, at least 5 or 6 glasses, about that much over the last few days. So it hasn't changed much since the last clip I did of what I tasted. So on the nose, it's very, very, very tropical. Get a lot of rum characteristics, a lot of vanilla, the cinnamon, very tropical. Get coconut, maybe a little bit of pineapple. It also has a little bit of apple and pear, cinnamon, a little bit of banana. All right, on the palate. One more. So, and a lot of other things I could throw in there. This is just sort of a short list on my criteria. What's the intensity of the flavor? What is the sort of precision of the flavor? So on this, what it has, I really like. Very good quality aromas and flavors. Tropical notes of banana and coconut. A lot of vanilla. Nice cinnamon notes. A little bit of say apple character to it, and that's about it. What I get on entry, I pretty much get in the mid palate, and I get into the finish. Now I do like the length of the finish, so it doesn't have a lot of evolution. It pretty much it's in that ballpark, and that cinnamon is sort of kicking around right now, and the vanilla is sticking around. So I think it's got a nice length of finish. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of development, right? So I'll give more points for the length of finish. Not a lot of points in terms of the quantity of different aromas and flavors, but the quality is really, really, really good. It doesn't have a lot of transition as well. So these are the factors I'm weighing going on in my head. Mouthfeel, and I'm tasting this neat, I would say it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's not super, super thick. It's definitely not thin. The 46 ABV is doing it really, really well. If it was at 40, it might get thin. Probably one of my biggest issues with the 40 ABV whiskeys is not necessarily the quantity of or quality of aromas and flavors. They tend to lack the mouthfeel that I like in a whiskey. That tends to be the number one thing, and they tend to be chill filtered, right? And so if you put water on them or anything like that, this oftentimes can sort of become even weaker and fall apart. So, kudos to this whiskey for not being chill filtered, for having the mouthfeel that it does, for having the length of finish that it does. The weaknesses, right, that can be improved is more complexity and more development, right? So it's got those sort of pros and cons. And I do this evaluation really, really, really quick, right? You don't hear me normally spelling this all out in a video. You know, I briefly mention these things when I go through a video. But this is what's going on in my head. And if you do this a lot, you practice a lot, you can do this very, really, really quickly. Does it have the wow factor? No. It's pleasant. I like it. It's good. But that's probably about. Now, what about point scores? Now, point scores is something that a lot of people would like to debate. I'm sure down in the comment section, there's going to be a lot of debate, a lot of comments and so forth about point scores. Not a lot of people talk about their point score system. So the 100-point system that we have is developed by Robert Parker, a wine critic. He began the Wine Advocate, and then the Whiskey Advocate sort of borrowed from his name, and then the 100-point score made it to the Wine Spectator and a number of other wine journalism, and then made its way over to the whiskey world. So he even admits there is a subjective factor to tasting, and he talks about that sort of the wow factor moment. I would say Robert Parker and his approach to evaluating wines is probably one of the biggest influences on my life as a taster. And he's also both someone who's both heralded as a champion and also hated, right? He's a controversial figure. But I really, really admire him. So here is how I break down the point scores. And this is somewhat based on the American school education system. So 95 to 100 points would be a superior whiskey. It's superior quality in aromas and flavors and structure and development. I very, 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 very rarely give 95 to 100 points. 90 to 95 points is an excellent in aromas and flavors, structure and development. In fact, it's structure and development that if something is in the 80s and I'm potentially going to go higher, it's the structure and development that's going to kick it over potentially into the 90s if it has really, really good aromas and flavors. 85 to 89 is very good, but needs improvement in structure and development, right? And that's sort of the breaker in between the high 80s and the 90s. 80 to 84 is good, but may be somewhat simple, lacking structure and development. And then 75 to 79 is something that's mediocre in aromas and flavors, showing minor flaws. Anything below 75 has serious flaws and should be removed from the market. Now, recently I had a whiskey that had a petrol character that I really, really didn't like, right? It was a Connemara cask strength. I gave it 79 points. It almost, if it didn't have, it had some really good positive quality characteristics to it after it opened up and after the petrol character reduced a little bit, right? It had some nice savory notes, and you go back and watch that video and you see what I'm talking about. But if it didn't have those really good, strong, positive characteristics, that one petrol note, that domineering petrol note, would have taken 75 points and below, and I would have just totally banned it entirely. So that's my point score system. And so now I don't know what other whiskey tubers do or other reviewers do or how they approach their scoring system. They may just go purely by their feeling and just sort of come up with a number. I don't know. I don't hear this as being a topic. Now, never, 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 never make a purchase based on a point score. Whether you're talking about someone who's published in a magazine or a journal or in a video such as mine. It's all the aromas and the flavors and everything else that's said about the whiskey that matters the most. That matters more than the point score. You could have two of us given the exact same notes, aromas and flavors, and our point scores are going to be off a little bit, you know, plus or minus a few. It's the aromas and flavors and how we describe the whiskey that is key. The point score is just sort of something to hang your hat on, you know, just something sort of to nail it, to sort of stick it and get, okay, where you're at with this, right? That's not the most important thing. If all you're paying attention to is point scores, you may be sadly disappointed. You may be sadly disappointed. I would never go 100% on a point score. Pay more attention to the aromas and flavors. And I would say, if you know your whiskey tuber or your reviewer or your writer, whoever, your blogger, whoever it is, if you can get a sense of their passion and excitement about the whiskey, right? That is as important as the aromas and flavors and all the descriptors that are used, right? Do they get excited about this whiskey? Are they like, wow, this is an awesome whiskey, right? And then, of course, you're going to want to look at quality price ratio. You know, this is a very good whiskey. I'm going to give this a solid, I'm going to give it 85 points. 85 points. I think it's really, really good. I think it's really good in the finish. I already mentioned this before. It's the lack of complexity and transitions. And it's more or less like someone poured some rum into your whiskey. Now, if you're a big rum fan, you may actually really, really like this. If you don't like rum, you may not like this, right? All right, so is there a subjectivity aspect to it? Yes, I'm a big fan of peated whiskeys. Love peated whiskeys. I'm growing into becoming a big Irish fan, right? I'm gonna take a little sip. I like bourbons, but I'm not as big a bourbon fan as I am of a Scotch fan. Now, if you don't like peat, then it doesn't matter what I say how great a peated whiskey is, you know, why would you want to listen to it? Also get to know your reviewers. What is their specialty? What are they best at? What do they know the most about? Also, watch a number of different whiskey tubers and see someone who, you know what? I notice what I like tends to line up with that particular whiskey tuber. It may be Jason C., which I had earlier in this video, or the Bourbon Junkies, or it may be Rex and Daniel. It may be Bill, the Whiskey Dick. It may be Vin PF over at No Nonsense Whiskey. It may be Roy Aquavite, right? Or a number of others. You know, maybe the Whiskey Friend. You know, there's just a lot of other whiskey tubers. But find someone who tends to be similar to your notes and go, okay, this is a guy that I've learned to sort of trust. I think we're sort of in sync, or even women whiskey reviewers who I'm sort of in sync with, and then I go with them. That's the one you're going to want to follow, pay more attention to, and make your purchases based on your, I would say, appreciation for their perception and ability to communicate about whiskey. I would say, there you go. Which is why, for me, I never want to steer you wrong. I want to be 100% honest, because I would feel really, really bad, and I would be ruining my own reputation if I ever steered you wrong. And that's why I'm trying to, as much as possible, avoid ever being influenced because somebody gave me something for free, or somebody paid for something, or something like that, right? I want to be able to be, as much as possible, right? We're not perfect, as unbiased and as objective as much as we can about a whiskey review. Alrighty. I know this has been a little longer video. If you have followed us all the way to the end, I want to thank you very much. All right, if you like watching my videos, and if you're not yet subscribed, I ask that you subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I go live or post a new video. And if you are one of my patrons, I want to thank you very much for joining my little group. All right, until next time, cheers. By the way, if you got any comments or questions, leave them down below.